I'll probably catch some flack for this one. This is the Rockstead Hizen. This is a $790 Japanese knife. And Rockstead is really well known for being kind of the pinnacle of production-made knives. Kind of like, there's a very direct comparison between the Hizen and the small Sebenza. They're very similar knives in a lot of ways. Similar size, similar profile, both having very smooth actions on washers, and both being known for extraordinarily high levels of fit and finish. And I will tell you right now, Rockstead on the Hizen here does have an extraordinarily high level of fit and finish. That is absolutely true, but I will tell you, in my use, I'm not seeing the crazy performance that some folks might say that they get out of their Rocksteads. So I'll get into that. For some specs, your Hizen here, again, a $790 knife, almost $800 for this guy. And this is a production knife. This is not a custom. This is production. Some parts of this, I think, do involve a pretty good amount of hand labor, but it is a production knife. There are going to be a bajillion other Hizens just like it out there. 2.875 inches on the blade, so 2 7/8. 125 thousandths on your blade stock. With this, it's basically like a straight back style. There's a little bit of drop to that point. The steel is YXR7 on this one, which is basically like HAP 40-ish, treated to 65 HRC, which back when Rockstead started doing this was really impressive because there weren't that many steels treated to 65 HRC. That started to become a bit less remarkable over time as we started to see more high-speed steels move into the market. Whole knife is 2.4 ounces, so under an ounce an inch. And this here is Duralumin, this handle, which is an aluminum alloy, which gives you that springiness that they can make a frame lock out of aluminum. The thing that most people first look to with Rockstead, and you'll see me wiping off this blade over and over again, is the blade. And the Hizen doesn't quite have Rockstead's most impressive blade grinds on it. A lot of Rocksteads will have a zero grind out of the factory, meaning there's only a primary bevel that goes all the way down to the terminating edge, and there's no secondary bevel. So when you've got your PM2 here, you've got your big primary grind and your secondary grind right down at the bottom, and the secondary grind is what you sharpen. Some Rocksteads will be true zero grinds where they just grind the whole thing all the way down to the edge. Zero grinds can get stupid sharp. They're also extremely hard to maintain. And that's doubly the case when you have these super high HRC steels that Rockstead likes to use. Rockstead likes to show that, their blades can, and they used to have, marketing materials around this, that their blades can outcut pretty much anything else in the market. And a lot of people like to say that Rocksteads can also get sharper than a lot of other knives. The Hizen here does have a secondary bevel. You can see it where things transition there. The upside is that this is easier to sharpen and maintain yourself than a lot of other Rocksteads. The downside, which we'll get to, is you don't get that kind of insane cutting performance, at least in my experience, that you get out of a lot of other Rocksteads. But this is a beautiful blade nonetheless. You got this bead blasted look here with this very cool fuller design they've got here, with a thumb stud that sits a little bit proud of the back of the blade. Nice little swedge across this top here that actually widens toward the tip. There's actually just a lot of machining that goes into this blade, a lot of different cuts and things like that when you look more closely. A little bit of jimping toward the back here. It is, nice jimping, and then it gives you some bite when you really bear down on it, but can skate over it when you want to. There's some bigger jimping on the handle here and over here and over here. Not really, mostly just for indexing so that you can know where you are on the handle, but it does give you a little bit of traction. And then you've got a pretty simple handle design here that's mostly straight, but again, is kind of like a small Sebenza in the sense that it looks simple, but the closer you look, you see, a gradual sweeping curve across the back here. a gradual curve across the bottom here. This big steep front finger index here. Really nice sort of curves around the front that don't quite look like anything else. And then this sweeping kind of seashell pattern that goes over the entire handle. Really clean and crisp lock bar cutout there. Lockup is tight and secure and early. So as you would expect from all your hardware, super duper flush. As you would expect from Rockstead's reputation, it's kind of a high-end minimalist feel to it. Again, very similar to Chris Reeve, where there's nothing loud about the design. There's nothing overtly complicated, though Rockstead certainly does overtly complicated in some of their much higher-end knives. But this one here, it's a simple design, but the closer you look, the more you see just how nicely everything is done. Just a little bit of extra care that went into everything. Like the little, the finishing on the inside of these scales. The fact that, basically every surface of this blade, other than the polished edge here, and that is it's a light polish, but that is a mirror polish on that primary bevel here. And there's a secondary mirror polish on the secondary bevel. That takes a lot of effort. It's just really nicely finished everywhere. One thing to note about the Duralumin, it's anodized, but it's not quite like a Type 3 hard coat anodized, so you will see that anodization chip off in various places. And even just carrying this and having it bang around in my pocket, you can see here, the coating chip off. So those are your overall specs. Again, the most important size comparison here is your small Sebenza. And if you know the small Sebenza, it's almost exactly the same size as your small Sebenza. It's very similar in size to your Delica. It's, smaller than something like a 940. It's about the same length, but significantly smaller as a knife than your Para 3. So let's get into what works and what doesn't work about this knife. First is blade. Blade shape, especially on a small knife like this, is solid. This kind of blade shape with a tiny bit of drop on that drop point, especially it comes out in a way that even though this spine is pretty straight, the whole thing kind of angles down, so your tip is only a little bit above your pivot there. It's a nice blade shape for a small knife like this. It's almost all belly. It's almost a continuous curve all the way down, so you do have lots of nice continuous curve for those longer cutting tasks. You do have a little finger choil that you can choke up on it here for, detailed work. You can grab up on the blade for detailed work to get close to that edge. This could be a really cool kind of utility knife with a Warncliffe. That's not the way that Rockstead rolls. Instead, you've got a very elegant, very pretty looking blade that is, that having all that belly does let this work into some larger task in a way that some other smaller knives sometimes don't. It's a beautiful blade for all the reasons we've mentioned. But in terms of performance, I've actually found this knife to be pretty middle of the road. I found this blade to be pretty middle of the road. Now, Rockstead's reputation is that their knives get super duper sharp and hold their sharpness for a very long time. And I will say, I received this knife used, but I received it used with the previous owner reporting that they put very, very little use on it. The other thing just to note with Rockstead is, however much use is on the blade, it's more difficult to sharpen a Rockstead, even ones with the secondary bevel. The secondary bevel just takes more care to replicate that original edge than maybe something like, your typical knife with a primary bevel, a typical primary and secondary bevel. So a lot of people that are getting Rocksteads are not necessarily going to have the ability to maintain their edge, or if they do maintain their edge, they're only going to do it by butchering the factory edge and completely replacing it with their own edge, which when your secondary bevel is this tall, that's going to be very visible and it's going to mess up the way the knife looks. I will say, if I just get, my little note card here, and you can hear, Is it sharp? Yeah. Is it spectacularly sharp or in any way interestingly sharp? Absolutely not. This is a decently sharp knife that happens to look really pretty and have really nice finishing. But, you know, you look at your like choil shot approximation here. It's a pretty fat behind the edge knife, all considered. You've got decently thick blade stock here, certainly not thin blade stock, and not that much space for that grind to drop. It is, you know, you look at the plunge here, a decently aggressive grind, but it's just not coming all that thick behind the edge. And so the only thing that leads this knife to feel extremely sharp is when you get that factory edge or when you get that freshly sharpened edge, and that very apex is super, super hair-poppingly sharp. And then you're basically asking the high HRC steel of the blade to maintain that hair-popping edge. That also means that this edge is going to be relatively fragile because you've got a high HRC that's coming down to a very keen edge. And so you end up, just after you sharpen it, with a knife that feels super, super sharp at the edge, but gets fat relatively quickly as you go up that blade grind. And then the second that you don't have that super, super acute edge, it just doesn't feel that sharp. It's not like it's dull. It's not like the edge is bad. But if I compare it to a knife that has a legitimately great grind, like something like my swayback here that gets super thin behind the edge, obviously a bigger knife, but just what I had on hand, night and day difference. The swayback feels way, way sharper than the Rockstead. I came into getting this Hizen really thinking that I was going to be impressed by the reputation that Rockstead has for these crazy, crazy sharp edges. And it's possible if I got the Higo or if I got one of their other knives that has a true zero grind, that I would experience that crazy sharp edge. But I absolutely did not get that experience on the Hizen here. I got a knife that was sharp, but not remarkably sharp in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, if anything, slightly on the duller side of what I would expect in a small knife like this that I would want to be slicing. These handles are very nice. We already went over the finishing. Very nice rounding, very nicely knocked down. Ergonomically, it's a very solid neutral handle. It's very similar, not in feel, but in what it's trying to do to the small Sebenza, in the sense that these gentle curves, the texture on the front, the nice rounding, and especially this front choil here, makes this a front finger index, makes this a neutral handle that just feels very comfortable and a little bit locked into the hand. It's quite easy to choke up, get close to that blade, get close to that edge. And if you want to choke back, put your front finger in that index, it will roll into your palm very nicely. Now, this is a small knife. You're going to feel yourself trying to hold on to this knife because it's just not big. It's not that thick. It's not that fat. It is just not a large object to hold on to. But this seashell pattern does give you a bit of extra texture. There's a hint of chalkiness to the aluminum surface finish. And this gradual curve does help with the ergonomics. It's, you know, for all the tasks, I would usually use it pinched up like this a lot. For all the tasks that I would use a small knife for this, the ergonomics were above average. Not as good as something like the Sebenza, which has remarkably good ergonomics for what it is. But, you know, if you're talking neutral handles, above average, pretty good. Now, the other thing people talk about with Rockstead is they do talk about the action, and that I can report the action is excellent with one exception. So right now, I've got this tuned up the way I want to. Very nice, relatively easy disengagement. And, you know, first little bit of the close here is a little bit sort of just almost scratchy feeling because it's not up on the detent ball yet. And then once it gets up on that detent ball, very smooth and hydraulic through the rest of this action. Very nice and controlled. Centers very nicely. Medium strength detent, easy to get onto these thumb studs, not grabby at all. And this is a slow roller. Can you flick it if you want to? Sure, that probably made a couple of people cringe. You can, but it really feels like it wants to be slow rolled, and it's a nice, luxurious action through that whole way. The D10 can feel a touch strong sometimes, but really that's just if your hand's in the wrong spot. It's very smooth, very nice to open and close. Nice little clicks on both ends. Very good action. The butts. This pivot, at least on my Hizen, has really liked to walk itself loose. Like when I have this open, when I have this in the half position now, there is a teeny tiny hint of play in this. And when I do, like I flick it like that, I can feel that little bit of play in the open position. When I tighten this Torx bit down a little bit more, it will lock back in. It will be super secure again. It will feel even smoother than it does now. But this pivot has actually walked itself out enough that, you know, there have been a couple times I picked up the knife and the pivot is visibly proud, visibly sticking out of the knife, because it has just continually walked itself back out. And that is a fit and finish issue in a way. You know, whatever way they set up this pivot, they did not control for that. And so when I was using this Hizen, I regularly had to go back in and tighten this pivot back up. And it is a sort of action that is sensitive to pivot tension. So, you know, some pivots are really well designed where you can crank that pivot down and the action will still work. This is not one of those. If I crank the pivot too tight, then the action will bind up. I won't be able to open the knife, at all. I have to then tune it to get that action just right so that I get that nice smooth action. So the pivot has been a bit of an issue, even though tuned at its best, it does give you that kind of smooth Rockstead action that people talk about. And so to wrap it all up, like in use, this knife was fine. Like it was a pretty good knife, you know, easy, takes up almost no space in the pocket. Let me say that. Very light, you know, 2.4 ounces, very small, sort of hangs in your pocket like a stick of gum, very functional pocket clip. And I don't care that it's a simple clip. It is functional, very small, very light, disappears in your pocket, easy to pick it up and roll out, decent, average, everyday blade shape for everyday stuff. The edge, again, is bitey enough. It's not like it's a dull edge. It's not exceptionally sharp. And the only reason I'm harping on it so much is that is part of Rockstead's reputation, is they have exceptionally sharp edges. This one, in my experience, is not that. But sharp enough, easy to pull out, do stuff in the garden, do stuff, you know, score some boxes, open some packages, whatever you want to do. It's a functional blade for that. It'll feel nice in your hand, and it is cool to have an object that is just this refined, this sort of cool looking, this well finished. I mean, the blade finishes in particular are phenomenal, and like the details of the machining on this handle are really, really good, really, really precise. It's a really nice object to have on your person. But as a user, it's absolutely fine. But in no way is it great or even remarkable in any way, shape, or form when you just look at it in terms of use. And when I think about other like really well-regarded knives, and I'll just pull out 3 others here. Like the Sebenza, the small Sebenza, which is in the running for my favorite knife, has incredible ergonomics given what it is as robust and tight as any knife on the market. And this blade, when you get the right edge on it, this hollow grind is truly spectacular. This can be it's not just a beautiful knife, it can be a phenomenal user of a knife. The Shirogorov Neon Zero here. This thing, you know, the action is just about perfect, but the ergonomics are also very, very good. It's very light, very slim, and this blade cuts really, really well. Like, there are other elite knives out there that are both extremely well finished, extremely beautiful, and remarkably strong as users. The Hizen, in my experience, is only one of those things. It's only a beautiful knife. It's not bad in use, but it's also not better than anything else. And for $790, I kind of want it to be better. It isn't necessarily fair to the knife because that might not be what it was trying to do. It might just be trying to be a beautiful knife that is good enough at cutting. But when I think about how Rockstead markets the knife, and when I think about how people talk about this knife, they often do talk about, the action being amazing, and the action on here is very good, though that pivot issue is disconcerting. And they talk about the cutting performance, which I just have not been able to replicate with this one. The cutting performance, in my experience with this Hizen, has been good, but in no way great. And so with that, if you did have a truly elite action, if you did have a truly elite cutting performance, especially with a steel that, kept an edge for ages, I could see how you could say, okay, it's $790, but it's kind of like how people that are just getting into knives, a lot of people will say, well, buy once, cry once, just get a Sebenza. You can say that because this is such a well-designed knife that it can be the only knife that you need. It really is a superior design, both aesthetically and functionally. And that's how people can justify paying $400, $450 for a very basic design, but one that is executed at an extraordinary level. The Hizen just doesn't have that performance piece in my experience. It's cool, it's beautiful, it's extremely refined, and it is remarkable in the sense that there's nothing else quite like what Rockstead is doing. But I can't recommend it. I can't say it's remarkable in any way as a user, and that makes the $790 tougher to swallow. You really need to enjoy this aesthetic. You really need to be buying this as effectively a piece of jewelry. It's something beautiful that you want to have on your person. It's something that you like to admire. It's something you like to play with. You like the blade finish. You like the way it looks. You like the way this handle is done, etc., etc. You're paying for that aesthetic because, in my experience, the supposed functional differences between a Rockstead and a lot of other well-made knives just haven't been there, in my experience. And that's a little disappointing. I gravitate toward knives that are subtle in their design and extremely well made. Stuff like your Christie, stuff like your Shirogorov, things like that. I bought this Rockstead on a flyer thinking that it might be kind of like the ultimate of that for me. I also really like Japanese kitchen knives in general. I've got a whole bunch of them hanging on my wall right now. So it's not like I'm a stranger to Japanese cutlery. But this just didn't give me any of the crazy stuff that I was told to expect out of a Rockstead. And so, in that sense, at $790, it's a good knife, but there's no way that I can recommend dropping that insane chunk of change on something that is just very good in a bunch of really important dimensions. If you really like the way this looks, if you really like the way this feels, and if you really like fit and finish and machining as an end in itself, and you want something that is just very beautifully made, then yeah, cool. $790 might be worth it for you. But at that price point, especially with a knife that is this, relatively simple, you got to be delivering something exceptional. And other than the blade finishes here, other than the level of, machining that is on display, I'm just not feeling it. So anyway, maybe I just got a lemon. I would love to hear your comments on Rockstead, whether it's the Hizen or one of their other knives. I would love to hear your comments down below. I would love to believe that my experience with the Hizen might not be representative, and other people might have had a much better experience with the Hizen than I have. It's possible that just the way that I got mine, maybe the person who sold it to me had used it much more than they thought they would. I look at this edge and, I run my nail along. I don't have a nail right now, but if I run this nail along it, I don't feel snags. It doesn't feel like a heavily used edge. I don't think that this thing has been used. I think it's just fat behind the edge. But if I did get a lemon, I would love to hear about it. I would love to hear about your experiences with Rocksteads, this one or otherwise. And if I'm wrong, and if this one just sucks, then please let me know. And I'm happy to reevaluate my opinion. But drawing from my personal experience, which is how I very much try to do my reviews, it's a very good knife, but I don't think it's a great knife. And you got to be great for almost $800. So anyway, this has been Clark the Knife. Again, comments down below. Would love to go back and forth with some of y'all about how you feel about this knife, how you feel about Rocksteads in general. And I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.